You are watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada. I am Jon Elmer. This is the Resistance Report Ceasefire Edition for day 748 of Israel's genocide, and this is day number 14 of the ceasefire. I am reporting this on the 23rd of October. Just brief introduction. As ever with Israel, and as Nora reported in her newscast, the ceasefire is not being fully adhered to. Core elements of it are not being adhered to by the Israelis since it went into effect on October 11th. There's been more than 80 violations, 88 people killed, 315 people wounded, and most of these are around or on the so-called yellow line that I will break down today. The bodies of 15 Israeli captives have been returned to Israel. 13 bodies remain in Gaza, and after 30 more Palestinian bodies were returned to Gaza on Wednesday, that brought the number to 195 that had been returned from Israel, according to the Ministry of Health. There is no fixed timeline for the exchange of bodies. It's obviously an extremely difficult task to find these bodies. They were killed by Israel in buildings that have been collapsed. And as we know, there's 10,000 Palestinians as well buried in the rubble. And that has been a central feature of Israel's genocide. So there is no timeline on the return of the bodies, but the exchange rate is 15-1. And we saw of the 195 bodies that have been returned, Palestinian bodies, we saw them bound, tortured, executed, and in all manner of horrific conditions. The government media office also reports that less than 20% of the agreed upon aid has entered Gaza, only a fraction of the cooking gas. Cooking gas had not entered at all since March, and a small amount has entered, but not nearly what was agreed upon. And for their part, the Israeli prime minister said on Saturday on a popular talk show on his channel 14 that the war is not over yet. There are a few more things that need to be done, and we all know that. He said that on The Patriots on Saturday. IDF spokesperson 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞 said, "We cannot live with Hamas ruling the Gaza Strip. If these goals are achieved through negotiation, that is enough. If not, we will fight. We will return to fight." And the defense minister, for his part, has instructed the IDF to prepare a comprehensive plan, quote unquote, to defeat Hamas in the event of the renewal of the war. So that's just by way of introduction. Now let's take a look at this key feature of the ceasefire agreement, which is this yellow line. We're looking here at a map that the Israelis released on the weekend. And for people not looking at this, not or who are listening, this is a map of Gaza that shows no place names at all. It just has a yellow line that appears more or less arbitrarily drawn, and there's no indication of what it corresponds to on the ground in Gaza, which is notable because it's creating a free fire zone in that entire red area. The sort of agreed upon amount of space that that yellow line has is that Israel is under control of 53% of the Gaza Strip at this point. But this is like the map that was released by the Israeli military to tell people where they could not go, and you can see clearly on this map that that this map lacks clarity. It's vague. Its fidelity is in question, so it's unclear. And this is after 2 years of genocide, where Israel ran the genocide based on a grid map that broke down the Gaza Strip into hundreds and hundreds of blocks where they would evacuate people from blocks. That was the way they carried out the ethnic cleansing. And so it's just a pretty significant juxtaposition between the detail of the genocide and then this shoot to kill line that seems roughly randomly drawn. And the reason that it's randomly drawn is because it was effectively put together by Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff for Trump during these negotiations. And it reads, and you'll see in the maps coming up, that they look like they're drawn on the back of a napkin, which matches the way that Kushner and Witkoff have spoken in the media about how this negotiation was essentially phone calls between his rich real estate friends or golfing friends. But yeah, what stands out is clearly the lack of demarcation. The Israeli army radio commented on this and said that they had been interviewing soldiers, and the soldiers reported to army radio that um, the actual placement of the IDF outposts, forward operating bases, are considerably behind that line. In some cases, several kilometers away. So the Israelis have been building over this genocide, and particularly over Gideon's chariots operation, have been destroying from the border out, and they've made it a few kilometers, as far as 3 kilometers in places from the border that have been destroyed. And this yellow line is in advance of those lines, so it's even more favorable to Israel. It's presumably Trump doesn't know, Witkoff, Kushner don't know where those lines correspond to population centers. And so they allowed the Israelis to draw the line, and the Israelis drew the line to take the maximum amount of area. The implication of this Army radio said is that there are many areas that should be actually under IDF control, but there's no forces there as they're positioned behind that yellow line. But they use that line as a shoot to kill line, as Nora said, and as I just reported on the nearly 100 people that have been killed. Also, based on these interviews with soldiers that are based in the outposts inside Gaza, Army radio said that the soldiers told them at these posts that they report they are open to fire. They have free fire um, uh, directives, meaning that there's no forces in front of them. This is how Army radio interprets that, which proves that the IDF has retreated much further than the yellow line. However, the thing that's notable to normal people who are not Israelis is that the soldiers have an open fire uh, directive from those positions. Let's take a look at this next map here. This is from Trump's initial tweet. What is it? Truth Social, whatever they call a Truth Social post. He put this map on there, and you can see with this map that the yellow line, particularly up the spine of central Gaza and in the north, follows along a key strategic ridge along that line. The Israelis call it Ridge 70 because it's 70 meters above sea level. I think we have another one that zooms in a little bit closer on that you can see there. That's the Shujaiya neighborhood that Assam was just talking about. More than half of it is cut off and on the other side of the yellow line, but you can see that ridge line that runs across the top there of between the boundary of Gaza and Gaza City, and that is a strategic high point, and that has been the gateway to Gaza for the last 5,000 years. Like I said, the IDF calls it Ridge 70 because of its height. 𝐓𝐿 𝐈𝐧𝐿 wrote that the control of that ridge grants dominance over the observation line and fire in both directions. Thus, one of the IDF's first moves in recent operations was establishing 7 outposts, forward operating bases along it. And the other day, 𝐓𝐿 𝐈𝐧𝐿 military correspondent Yoav Zatoun wrote that, for example, the Yellow Line proposal, Israel's security buffer along the Gaza border has been doubled or even tripled in certain areas compared to its current configuration. Over the past year, most frontline IDF forward operating bases have been positioned 700 to 800 meters from the border. This distance was chosen for its topographical advantage. It allows forces to monitor and control Ridge 70, which overlooks Gaza. And also on the other side of that is Nahal Oz, which was a key Israeli military base for the northern command of the Gaza division that was overrun in minutes by Qassam fighters from Shujaiya. Yedio's supposition is that since Israeli officials were involved in shaping the map, it's reasonable to assume that part of their intent was to preserve gains made by the IDF during Operation Gideon's Chariots Part 1. These include the flattening of thousands of buildings in the neighborhoods and villages near the buffer zone within 2 to 3 kilometers of the fence. We'll see that coming up in other maps that I have here to show you this. But let's look at the Trump document, because this is what the maps were made of, number 3. And this is just, I don't know, the most Trump kind of map here. It's literally drawn from the back of a napkin. It just has 3 random lines that don't correspond to population centers, that don't show Israeli control. We're looking at a map that has a blue line or purple line there. The Israeli military was never on that point. So that is not their position right now, which that map identifies as the current IDF line of control. So it's a fictitious line there. And at the top, it's called Trump: End of Gaza War. This map. So this is the map that is going to be what he talks about. His 3,000-year peace agreement is basically looks like it was drawn with crayons. It's really remarkable. But you can see where the roots of this were. And then the Israelis took that proposal and drew the maps where they wanted. So the way the proposal goes, and by looking at this map, the initial line of withdrawal is the yellow line. In the first phase, Hamas is expected to release all remaining Israeli captives, both living and deceased, while Israeli forces pull back to the line designated as the yellow line on the map. And the second stage, which is the reason why we're going to focus on this yellow line, is because the second stage of this proposal, the ceasefire agreement, is extremely vague and on the surface very unlikely. And so this yellow line may be something that we're following for many months to come. But the second line is supposed to be during that phase. The second phase is when the International Stabilization Force comes into play. But there's no timeline, there's no exact boundaries, there's no timing mechanism for the IDF withdrawals. The International Stabilization Force doesn't exist, and it has deep implications for sovereignty for Palestinians. We know that the Israelis are already complaining about that they don't want didn't want Turkey involved in putting troops on the ground. But the resistance has been clear that there's no foreign force on the ground in Gaza. They've made that clear a number of times, and this international security force is devastating to Palestinian sovereignty. So we'll see how that goes in future negotiations. If we look now at number 5, you can see the original map. And this was the map that the Israelis, this is being shown on Israeli television. Yeah, that's right, number 4, being shown on Israeli television. So this is the version of the map. You can see it's different than the first map we showed, because this was the map that was trying to show the Israeli population that that the Israeli military was still deep inside of Gaza, which was the terminology that Netanyahu wanted to spin for his victory, which everyone in Israel knows it's not a victory. Qassam was not defeated. Hamas was not defeated. The government was not defeated. And the captives were not returned through force and violence. They were returned through a negotiation that could have happened in early October if Netanyahu and the Israelis wanted that. But you can see here from the Israeli map on the outside, those are all the Gaza envelope settlements. They start from the bottom left on the border with Egypt. That's Kerem Shalom. And they go all the way up around Gaza. You can also see by this map how the Gaza envelope was built. You can see where the villages are. There's no villages behind those villages. All of the Gaza envelope kibbutz are all part of a militarized border boundary around the Gaza Strip to keep Gazans inside Gaza. And that's what their plan was from 1948 when these kibbutz were put into place. So there's been a couple of media attempts to make these maps based on those ridiculous maps from Trump. And let's take a look at number 5. This was the BBC's effort, and it shows a bit of a deeper line in Khan Yunis. The line in Khan Yunis is not that far forward. The Israelis have truncated the Morag corridor and the Magan Oz corridor, which they made a big fuss about during Gideon's chariots creating, and the mass demolitions to create those lines are not actually in the map, but you can see the buffer zone depth all around Gaza. And like Asim said, this cuts off a number of people that live inside that red zone. But what is notable about it is that the vast majority of the population will be under Hamas rule inside that buffer zone, with the yellow line as a shoot to kill line. On Sunday, the defense minister said that the major challenge for Israel after the phase of returning the hostages will be the destruction of all of Hamas's terror tunnels in Gaza directly by the IDF and through an international mechanism to be established under U.S. leadership and supervision. He said that he has instructed the IDF to prepare to carry out that mission. So the yellow line will be a huge factor in that as well. If we look at the next map, Al Jazeera did another attempt to figure out where that map lined and actually put Palestinian communities and locations on that map. So this is a much better map. They came up with 58% would be under Israeli control. Israel says it's about 53%. But this is the thing about buffer zones, they're elastic. And everyone in Gaza knows, anyone who's visited Gaza knows, I know it very well from working there, that the buffer zones are elastic. They're not a fixed line on the ground and you can walk up to that line. They'll shoot you before that line. And then that is a permanent feature of living inside the Gaza ghetto. Um, but yeah, like I said, the Israelis seem to say that it's 53% control. And that map shows in those areas that the Israeli forces will remain in parts in Beit Hanun entirely, in part of Beit Lahia, in part of Shujaiya at least, and on the edge of Tufa and the Zaytun neighborhoods in Gaza City. So if we look at the next slide, this was released by the defense minister earlier this week, said that they were going to put out these markers on the yellow line, that there's going to be these yellow signposts. Again, something people in Gaza know very well, people in the West Bank know very well, because this is the beginning of what the checkpoints used to look like. These markers, although in the era of the checkpoints, they were tires and filled with concrete to make these signposts, whereas this seems to be some kind of artist rendering of what these signs are going to look like. But they're free fire zones, and that is what the defense minister said, that anyone coming near these lines will be shot without question. Um, Shoot first, ask questions later. We can see in this next clip from the Israeli military of them installing these now along the line. So you can see here an excavator bringing in the cement block, and they're topping it off with a sign. The defense minister said that any violation or attempt to cross the line will immediately be met with fire. This footage is from Monday, and you can see in the open areas where this is, and that you can sort of see those yellow markers that are very difficult to see for the population, and they will be enforced through gunfire. Those concrete blocks are painted yellow. They're topped with a yellow metal sign. They're 3.5 meters tall, and they're being placed at a distance of 200 meters from each other along the yellow line. So you can see here with this drone footage that the Israelis are showing that this is farmland. This is in the north here, and these are destroyed groves of Beit Hanun and Beit Lahia, the olive groves in particular up there that you can see. And all of this has been made possible, which we'll see in the next slide, by the erasure of Gaza. This is a map showing 2 years from October 2023 to October 2025, satellite imagery from above. This is done by Benzion Macalas, he's an IDF adjacent mapper. He's mapping this, trying to show the accomplishment of that of that 2-year genocide. But if you watch it just one more time while it slides back across the screen, you can see along the border that the buffer zones are completely wiped out, and that was Israel's first intent, was to pinch the buffer zones. And then once they realized there was no red lines and the world was going to let them do whatever they wanted in Gaza, then the genocide spread from the border region all throughout Gaza. So just to show you that, and then this next slide shows you what an actual neighborhood looks like. This is Tel Sultan in Western Rafah in the Saudi neighborhood. And you can see that there's literally not a single building untouched. People listening to this, we're looking at basically ashen gray, but you can see the grid of the street. You can see where the houses were. You can see some houses partially standing, but everything completely destroyed in Rafah. And that's Israel's accomplishments in Rafah. They can't defeat the resistance. They can't defeat the Rafah brigade, but they could wipe out the entire city of Rafah with international support because there was no red lines. Also, what this large buffer zone creates, so we can see on this next map, is it creates room for the militias to operate, the pro-Israel militias, that work with the Israelis, the popular forces of Yasser Abu Shabab, that are the most well known. And you can see this map from Sky News that shows the route in from Kerem Shalom crossing where aid would come in. That's the only road that is functional, and it runs right through Abu Shabab's uh, warehouses. And him and his gangs would unload the trucks and take the aid that was supposed to be for Palestinians, and they would sell it on the black market and drive up the price on the black market. Obviously, these Israeli collaborators are deeply unpopular in Gaza, not just because they're aligned with the military that carried out the genocide, carried out the war of annihilation against them, but also because they stole that aid that was not Israel's to distribute. It's not aid from Israel. It's Palestinian right and it's Palestinian sovereignty to be in control of that aid, which they are in the agreement. The GHF, the massacre site, they're gone. They up and left in the middle of the night. But these gangs also drove up the price of the aid by stealing the aid shipments and put it on the black market and put the products out of reach for almost anyone in Gaza. The resistance and Ministry of the Interior are offered a 1-week amnesty for these gangs, militias, to turn in their weapons for amnesty, and that expired just the other day. But these groups will pull and have withdrawn with the Israeli military behind this yellow line. So you have Israeli-backed forces behind that yellow line, which is something that we'll have to keep our eyes on, because if they were not behind that yellow line, the resistance and security forces in Gaza would destroy these groups in a matter of hours if they were not protected behind this shoot to kill line. But on the one last map here, I'll show you a map that I've shown you a number of times during this war. This is the cropland map. And you can see, if you follow that yellow line that we saw in the previous maps, you can see that virtually the entire cropland of Gaza is on the eastern side of the yellow line, on the Israeli side of the yellow line. So self-sufficiency in Gaza is going to be limited deeply by this line. We know that 86% from this map, this is the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, they put the number at 86% of cropland being destroyed. And this map is made from UNOSAT imaging. But the Dropsite News spoke to Fayed. He is from the Palestine Olive Council in Gaza, and he told the paper that 1 million out of 1.1 million olive trees in Gaza were destroyed by Israeli forces, and what remains are not groves but scattered trees in areas. These groves are primarily within that yellow line. So these are very significant sovereignty issues around that yellow line, as well as they're a line of death because they're a free fire line. And they enforce that line by firing at people who are approaching the line. So it's not just a fixed line. There's a buffer on the other side of the line, and people in Gaza know that very well. So that's the yellow line. I wanted to get you guys an understanding of where that is in this deal because it looks like it may be a feature for the next several weeks and months that we will be following. And I just want to wrap up here with Abu Hamza. We heard from the new spokesperson for Soraya Al-Quds. Abu Hamza is the nom de guerre that Soraya Al-Quds uses for their spokespeople before and after Naji Abu Saif, who is the Abu Hamza all throughout the war. And he served from the Great March of Return through the three wars before the Gaza War and all through the Gaza War. He was assassinated on March 18th, and that was the attack that Israel did in the middle of the night, the massacre in the middle of the night to break the ceasefire, and everyone was at home with their families in their beds in the middle of the night, and the Israelis, in a matter of minutes, hit 80 civil infrastructure and governmental targets. More than 400 people were killed in their homes, including 170 children, because they were all at home asleep with their children. That includes Abu Hamza, Naji Abu Saif, who was killed along with his family, his wife, his brother, and his brother's family. That attack in March was a cowardly attack, even by the standards of Israel. So in this address, Abu Hamza said yesterday, Abu Hamza situated Soraya Al-Quds as an integral part of the Battle of Al-Aqsa Flood, of course, from the first hours, a battle that they had trained for years. And that was the most successful complex qualitative military operation in the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict. The performance of Gaza's fighters, he said, would go down in the annals of history of the national liberation movements in any era. He saluted the steadfastness and sacrifice of the people of Gaza, who showed themselves as anchors on the land and demonstrated to the world a liberation struggle's resilience, without whom there would be no resistance, he said, of the people of Gaza. He also said that the battle showed the true face of Israel to the world, a bloody and racist army without morals or values, led by a government of thugs. He said Soraya Al-Quds would never have left their positions in the battle, no matter how many years it lasted. He saluted the Yemenis for their support operations and unprecedented naval blockade. He acknowledged the people of Lebanon for their sacrifice and called Hezbollah their brothers in blood, who paid an immeasurable price to support Gaza, giving a nod particularly to Saeed Hassan Nasrallah. He addressed the Iranians and their military leaders and scientists who he said were martyred on the road to Al-Quds. He gave a shout out, of course, as always, to the resistance in the West Bank as well. And he expressed the group's deep appreciation for civil defense rescue teams who, quote, pulled hope from the rubble of death with their bare hands. I think something that we, all of us watching this show, have watched for the last 2 years. Civil defense do just that. He also gave a salute to the medical workers and media workers of all types across all platforms for bringing the message of Gaza to the world, and also to the free people of the world who stood up and spoke up and demonstrated for Palestine. He said that Soraya Al-Quds declares their adherence to the ceasefire agreement negotiated at Sharm el-Sheikh, as long as the enemy does too. And on the topic of disarmament, he said, the resistance will continue as long as the occupation remains. So that is the resistance report for day 748 of this war ceasefire, day number 14.